Okay. You're on camera now. You're off camera now. All right, we're looking at our fourth love language tonight. And so we'll be looking at acts of service. If your love language, when you took that survey, if it was acts of service, or your significant others, your spouses is acts of service, then this one is for you. Let's start out in Galatians chapter number 5. We'll start out in Galatians chapter number 5. And that's the beginning of Go Eat Popcorn. Right? If you want to remember that portion of the scriptures, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, go eat popcorn. Colossians. All right, Galatians chapter number 5 and verse number 13. And again, speaking on acts of service, and I'm going to get into some practical aspects of that in just a moment, but to express love to somebody whose love language is acts of service, it's exactly what it sounds like. All right, in Galatians chapter number 5 and verse 13, it says, "For brethren, ye have been called unto liberty, only use not liberty for an occasion to the flesh, but by love serve one another." That, by definition, is acting or acts of service. Serve one another. And we do that by actions. The Lord himself showed us how to serve in John chapter number 13. All right, so we're supposed to love, by love, serve one another. All right, John chapter number 13. John chapter number 13. And we'll pick it up in verse 13. So the context here is when I do Christ in the Passover. You guys remember that? They're having the Lord's Supper, their last Passover. The Lord, we've seen some steps, but then we come to the part in the Passover where the Lord girt the towel about him, and he went around and washed the disciples' feet. Okay? So pick it up in verse 13, John chapter 13, verse 13. "You call me Master and Lord, and you say, well, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and Master, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you should do as I have done to you." Now, what the Lord is not saying here is wash each other's feet. What the Lord is saying here is we need to humble ourselves so that we serve one another. Right? In verse number 13, "You call me Master and Lord," and you ought to. But he showed us an example in this portion of the Lord's Supper or the Passover. He showed us an example that he humbled himself to wash the disciples' feet. We need to humble ourselves to serve one another. And that's this act of service. And so if your love language is acts of service, or your spouse's is acts of service, then we need to humble ourselves to serve one another. All right? Not just in a church setting, but in the home setting. And so again, if yours or your spouse's is their love language is acts of service, the way that you can show love to them and the way that they identify that you love them is when you perform little tasks. You perform little tasks. All right, you're in John chapter 13. Go to 1 Corinthians 13. First Corinthians chapter 13. Does anybody recognize that chapter? It's a love chapter. And what are we talking about? Love languages, are we not? So for context, I'm going to start in verse number 1, and I'll just read down through verse number 3. So 1 Corinthians chapter 13 and verse number 1, though I speak with the tongues of men and angels and have not charity, I'm becoming a sounding brass and a tinkling cymbal. Verse number 2, and though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith so that I could remove mountains and have not charity, I am nothing. All right, here's our love language one. And although I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned and have not charity, it profiteth me nothing. It doesn't do you. Now, we're talking about love language, and we're specifically speaking of love language within the marriage right now. Okay? It doesn't do you any good to go serve the world if you're not going to serve your spouse. You can't go out and feed the poor if you're not going to feed your spouse. You ought to not go out and build houses for the homeless if your spouse is not in a house. That almost sounds like a Dr. Seuss thing. Spouse in a house. In the backyard is a grouse. A wife with a knife looking at her louse. So do you see what we're trying to say here in the marriage? If you want to show that you love the one that you're married to, the one that you chose and the one that chose you, and their love language is acts of service, and you're going to go out and you're going to serve your boss, you're going to go out and serve your community, you're going to go out and serve your church. But when it comes time to coming into your home, you do nothing. Then this verse is applicable. And have not charity, it profiteth you nothing. Dr. Chapman was talking about a couple was talking about a couple, and they came to him after one of his seminars, and this was really early in his ministry, so he's young, and he got a little intimidated because they both came up to him and they said, you know, how do you know when you're not in love with the person that you married? All we ever do is disagree. We never see eye to eye on anything. And so Dr. Chapman looks at the husband. His name was Mark, and he looks at Mark and he says, all right, tell me what your problem is with your wife. What is she not? What is her problem with you? And he says, she doesn't ever let me go hunting. She hates it when I go hunting. I like to go hunting. And I only want to go hunting on one day a week, on Saturday. That's the only day that I want to go. And she's mumbling under her breath, no, you take off days of work to go hunting. And so he'll say, well, in 1 year, I'll take off 2 days so I can go hunting with my buddies. And I go on Saturdays during hunting season. And so then Dr. Chapman looks over at Mary, the wife. What's your problem with Mark? Well, when he comes home, he never helps me with anything in the house. And then Mark starts grumbling under his breath. Well, she's home all day. I'm at work. The kids are dirty. The house is messed up. She doesn't even make the bed all week. And so he's grumbling on, and Dr. Chapman is like, oh no, I'm in trouble. And so he was just speaking for a little bit, and then he kind of twisted. Instead of asking these questions, he's like, okay, so what can we do to fix this? And so he gave them both a sheet of paper and had them go sit down on the church. By the way, they're outside the church. Had them go sit down on the steps of the church. And he told Mark, write down 3 or 4 things that you'd like Mary to do for you in the marriage. Mary, you go write down 3 or 4 things you'd like Mark to do in the marriage. And it was almost exactly what they were saying. Mark wrote down 4 things, and I'm going to see if I can try to remember it. I would like the beds to be made sometimes. I'd like the kids' face to be washed. I'd like the house to be picked up. And at least dinner started so that we can eat within a half hour, 45 minutes of me coming home. That was the 4 things he wrote down on the paper. And then Mary got hers, Dr. Chapman got Mary's and read hers off, and it was something like, I wish he would wash the car. And I wish he would change the baby's diaper when he came home. And I think another one was, help me vacuum every now and then. It wasn't that often. And maybe it was like 1 time a week or something, do the dishes. It was something similar to that. And so Dr. Chapman looks at Mary and says, Mary, do you think that you could do these things that Mark wrote down on his list? And she's like, yeah, that'd be pretty easy. I could wash the kid's face. I could get dinner started. And then he looked at Mark and he said, Mark, do you think that you could do these things that Mary wrote down? And after looking at him, yeah, I think I could do those. And the problem was each other was demanding acts to be done rather than requesting. It was how it was brought up. All right? The reason why Mark wasn't helping, he asked the question, so how was your dating? Because they've only been married for 2 years. How was it when you were dating? What did Mark do for you when you were dating? And she said, you know what? Mark graduated a year before I did from high school, and so he's a year older than me. I was in my last year of high school while we were dating. And he would come over to the house and have dinner with me and the family. And he would get up and help me wash the dishes afterwards. And then if I had a school project, he would help me with the school project. And he would say something to Mary, well, how did that make you feel when he would do those things? And she was like, he was the greatest guy. All these other guys in high school, they wouldn't even think about doing stuff that Mark was doing for me. And then he looked over at Mark and he's like, why'd you stop?
It's her job.
And here was his answer. It was close to that. I watched my mom and my dad, and my mom cooked and cleaned the house, and the house was pristine. And my dad went to work, and he came home, and dinner was ready, and I thought that's how marriage was supposed to go. So when we got married, that was my ideal, and so that's what I was helping her, before when we were dating. I was doing all this stuff. But when we got married, I had this thought in my head on how marriage was supposed to go. And that's what I was doing, because I thought that's how it went. And Mary was like, under her breath, you're trying to make me like your mom. So you could see, the undertone here. And so when they both looked at the list, and then Dr. Chapman was asking, all right, if Mary was to ask you to do these 4 simple things, do you think you could do those? Yeah, those are easy. I can do that. And looked at Mary. Mary, Mark asked you to do these 4 things. Is that something you think you could do? Yeah, I could do that. That's easy. It was the way it was presented. And then it turned out that both of them, their love language was acts of service, and neither one of them was getting served. This one was demanding. This one was demanding. This was resentful because he was being demanded of. This one was resentful because she was being demanded of. And nobody was getting along. And then he came back to hunting. Well, Mary, is it all right if Mark goes hunting? Did he go hunting before when you guys were dating? She was like, yeah. He would go on Saturdays, but he would always be home, and he would wash his truck and be at our house by dinner time to have dinner with me and my family. And he washed his truck because he didn't want his truck to be dirty when he went and saw Mary. And she's like, I don't care if he goes hunting, but that's the only day that he could wash the car. And so neither one of their love tanks were being filled. Because again, both of their love language was acts of service, and neither one was serving the other one. This one was making demands or expectations. This one was making demands or expectations, and they weren't even communicating in their love language. They lost and again, they're outside the church, so they're hearing Bible preaching. I'm sure they've gone through and they saw you by love serve one another. They knew the story, the account of Jesus washing the disciples' feet. I'm sure that they have gone through the love chapter sometime. But it didn't click until Dr. Chapman brought it up and said, hey, you serve, and your guys' love tanks will get filled. So again, if your spouse's love language or the second language is acts of service, hey guys, it's all right for you to come home and do the dishes every now and then. Hey guys, you know how to run a vacuum cleaner. Hey guys, those of you that have babies, change a diaper. Make the bed. Anything that will help your wife. Now I'm talking to the guys. Anything that will help your wife. All right? If that's her love language. Ladies, if his love language is service, hey, bring him a Diet Coke. Bring him a tea. Don't ever go into his office and straighten up his desk. Okay? Don't go into workrooms and straighten up workrooms. Okay? You may think it's helping. I can't find a thing in my now, you go into my office and you look at the top of my desk, and it's messy. But I know where everything is on my desk, and when I'm looking for something, I'm going right to the place that it should be at. Okay? It may look messy to you. Don't straighten up the desk. Okay? Right? Don't mess with tools. Matter of fact, you know, there's just no reason for anybody to be touching anybody else's tools. You know, boy, if there's a foam cutout and the tool is supposed to be in it and it ain't in it, you just set off World War III. All right, your husband's love tank just drained. All right, and you know, if you have a pink toolbox, and this is the ladies, guys, you don't be going into her tools either. All right, my wife has her own toolkit, and hers is in the hall closet. And if I go into the hall closet and I get a tool out of her tool bag, I'm like, hon, I'm going to grab a screwdriver out of your bag, and I ask her. Because you don't be touching on somebody else's tools. Okay, and straighten up their desk. You know, it's kind of funny, and I brought this up to my wife, and she's probably listening in the nursery. I brought this up a year ago, 2 years ago, 5 years ago. Way time's been going. But, you know, it's all right if she has a honey-do list. But if I wrote her one, I asked her, how would you feel if I wrote you a honey-do list? That's just not done. How would you like it if I went into your office and straightened up your office and made your office look like I thought it should look? She was like, you could see death coming over her face. I got a death look. I mean, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The hairs on my arms stood up. The fog was coming out of because it just got real cold real fast. I started hearing, taps playing. Dum, 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 dum. But, we would never think about going in there. But the love language is, well, I'm helping. All right, make sure it's on the list of really helping.
Of things to help.
Okay? Because you could be doing service things, but it's the wrong dialect. You know how we've been talking about dialects? You might be doing things that make you feel better, but it's not doing anything to help the one feel better. And so when we do acts of service, we need to make sure that it's serving them, serving the other, and not the pretense of serving somebody else, and really you're serving yourself. All right, so again, the dialect there, you need to be careful in these acts of service, because you might be thinking to yourself, well, I do some of these things, and still your spouse is like, he never does anything for me, she never does anything for me. And it's because you're just missing the boat. He mentioned this in this chapter. He mentions this, and I feel like this would be a great, summing up of all of the love languages. But if your spouse is complaining the loudest about something, that's usually the love language that's not being met. Right? You never say, I love you. Have you guys, have you ever heard that? You never say, I love you. So usually it's the lady, usually it's the female, usually it's the wife that's saying it. But what's happening is she's not getting words of affirmation. Her love language is words of affirmation. And so she's screaming the loudest, you never say you love me, you never say thank you, you never say, all right? Or, you never do anything for me, you never do anything around the house. I got 17 kids, and you just come home, you sit in the recliner. All right? So the loud scream here is acts of service. Right? Usually what's spoken of the most or the loudest is the love language that's not being met. And guys, we need to have, when I say guys, I mean everybody. We need to have the maturity to listen and say, oh, oh, don't touch my workroom. Matter of fact, don't go in there and look for that cooler. Even if, no. Don't even throw eyeballs in there and look.
I'll look in my shelf. I think it might be in there.
But have the maturity, again, to say that, oh, and let it stick in your mind, and then start doing whatever that is so that doesn't become the loudest complaint. And this isn't just from wives to husband. This is husbands to wives too. Wife, if your husband is saying something, you never kiss me anymore. What's his loudest complaint? We're going to talk about that next week, right? Physical touch. You don't look at me like you looked at me before. Well, that's because I'm blind and I can't see you. I see trees walking. Isn't that what the blind guy saw when Jesus healed him the first time? He put mud on him. Didn't he say people were looking like trees or something? Yeah, and so I see trees walking around. But again, the loudest scream, the loudest complaint, we need to pay attention to, and then mark that and remember that, and then change what you need to change. If you want to fill up your others' love tank. And along those lines, turn with me to Philippians chapter 2. We're almost done. Philippians chapter number 2. Philippians chapter 2, and we'll look at verse 3, so verses 3 and 4. Philippians 2, 3, 4. Philippians 2, verses 3 and 4. Let nothing be done with through strife or vainglory. So we could put that into marriage, couldn't we? Strife or vainglory. All right. How many things should we do in strife and vainglory?
Nothing.
Okay, nothing. So we're talking about family right now. Now, Paul is probably really speaking about in the church, right? This goes in for church service as well. We ought to serve one another in the church. We ought to do acts of kindness in the church, acts of service in the church. If you're screaming, and I don't mean ah, but if your complaint or what I hear is, it's too cold in the room all the time. And I don't do anything about it. Am I really caring about you? Am I serving you? Now, if I hear the hot flashers say it's too hot in here, and then I hear normal people saying it's too cold in here,
What do you do?
and Betty is always cold.
What, Betty? Yeah.
There was a time that I was going to buy blankets for the church. So, well, it wasn't just Betty at the time. But again, if everybody is saying it's really cold in here, and I don't do anything about it, then I'm missing the boat. All right? If everybody is saying we don't like hot pink chairs, but I want hot pink chairs, I'm not really serving anybody. Now, I'm using ridiculous things, right?
Yeah.
But if the loudest complaints aren't being addressed, and by the way, don't care about time. Okay, don't complain at me that I preach too long, because I'm getting to where I don't care. All right, that's one of the things. You just suck it up, Buttercup. Because really, who is it that's preaching?
You.
Yeah, it's the Holy Spirit. All I am is the vessel. All right? Now, if I was just up here telling story after story after story after story, and it was all about me and I haven't gotten to the scriptures yet, yeah, shut up. Right? I'm with you on that one. I did, and it was live streamed.
Oh.
Stupid. There, I got that one out too. I said the two no words. All right, Philippians chapter 2. So let nothing be done through strife or vainglory, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem other better than themselves. Look not every man on his own things, but every man also on the things of others. So we're talking about serving one another, right? So again, in the marriage, we're looking at serving one another. In the church, we're looking at serving one another. Let's come back to the church. It's not about serving the pastor. You ought to never. No, I'm going to say it. You ought to never go to a church where the pastor is like a dictator. The pastor ought to be one that says, all right, guys, let's go. Let's go do this. The pastor ought to never be at a place where he says, go do this. Right? There's a difference. Now, there'll be some times when I'll say, hey, guys, could you help me do this? And I'm sitting down. I'm dead because I've been working all day, right? And where am I working now?
In the kitchen.
Serving the church, right? And so if I sit down when I ask you to do something, that's the only reason. Otherwise, it's a hey, guys, let's go. Can you help me do this? Kind of thing. That's how it ought to be. That's us serving one another. But if you get into a church where the pastor's like, go do this, go do that, and he's sitting down in his throne, have nothing to do with that place. Because you know who's not there?
Holy Spirit.
Holy Spirit. The scriptures say a whole lot about serving one another. And the Lord Jesus Christ washed the feet of the disciples. What pastor thinks he's higher and mightier than the Lord Jesus Christ? Or deacon? Or any. And so we need to be really careful about that. And so again, I dropped into the church there really quick. We're going to come out of the church, go back to the family. We need to serve one another. And again, this acts of service, if that's the love language of your spouse, then we need to do that. Now, let's just talk about some practical things, and I've already really mentioned them. Help with the dishes, help vacuuming, help clean the house, help pick things up. That was another thing that Mark said about Mary, one of the 4 things that I couldn't remember. Put your shoes in the closet. All right? An act of service is put your shoes where they belong, not in the middle of the floor. I used to get talkings to when I was in the military because I would take off my boots in the living room and I would take the socks off that were under my boots. Now, I'd been on the flight line at least 12 hours. Back in that time, if we were in an exercise, I was on the flight line for 16 hours. And these were black socks inside of black boots. Do you know what my socks did after that? They stood up by themselves, leaning against a wall like this. And my wife would say, you need to do something with those socks. Because she said, I ain't touching them. She touched them once and they crinkled. All the salt that was in them. Don't kick your shoes off and leave them in the middle of the floor. People got to walk through there. Don't take your purse and drop it in the middle of the floor. Don't take your jacket off and throw it in the middle of the floor. Acts of service. There's a place. Right? Even if you don't have a place, it's out of the way. Put it out of the way. How many of you have issues walking? Don't put stuff in the middle of the floor.
That's dangerous.
This is look not every man on his own things, but every man on the things of others. We need to learn to be considerate, and that's in our own families, in our own homes. Let's be considerate. You know what Mary and Mark did? They wrote down those lists. So if your love language is act of service, or your second one is, make out a list, give it to your spouse. That's going to be an exercise. All right, spouse, don't take it the wrong way. All right, be mature enough to say, oh, oh, okay. Because obviously you haven't been speaking their love language, and their love tank is empty. And you want to have, I mean, there's nothing sweeter than coming home and everybody's love tank is full. And there's rainbows and unicorns and butterflies in the house and smoked meat and bacon. You know? You know what I mean? So it's all great for the lady and it's all great for the man. Well, that's because everybody's love tank is full. Because we're speaking our language. All right, so guys don't, and I'm speaking to guys, folks, if their love language is acts of service and they come up with now, you active service people, 2 or 3 things on the list. Don't be putting 95. This isn't Luther's 95 thesis that you're nailing on the Catholic Church door. All right, this is everything you're doing wrong, bam! 2 or 3, 4 at the most. And then be mature enough, the one that receives that note, be mature enough to just say, oh, okay. And then after you've done that for a couple of months, then add one more each month. All right, this is an exercise for you to help your spouse dwell with you according to knowledge. Okay? Now, what's the number one key thing in marriage you guys heard from way in the beginning? Communication. All right? So, acts of service people, tell your spouse how they can serve you. Those of you married to the acts of service person, say, oh, and do it. All right? And it's a request. It's a request. It's not a demand. Okay? It's a request, not a demand. Because if you demand, then there comes up the wall and forget about it. Okay? Could you help me out with these things? That's John's number 1. His love language is being obeyed. All right, let's look at our last verse and then we'll be done. Ephesians chapter 5. Ephesians chapter number 5. And almost any time that a man goes to Ephesians chapter 5, the first verse that he sees is verse 22. Wives, submit yourselves to your husbands. We skip over verse number 21. I'd like you to highlight that verse, submitting yourselves one to another. Right? Let's not skip over verse 21, guys, as we're looking at verse 22. By the way, guys, if you're looking at verse 22, there's only 2 times in Ephesians chapter 5 that he says, wives, submit. There's 5 times that it tells husbands to love their wives. You know who you love more than you love your wife? You. Whatever man yet hateth his own flesh, he nourisheth it. He takes care of it. That's in this chapter. And so, guys, if we want to get into wives submit, then husbands love. But let's start out with verse 21 first, submitting ourselves one to another. You know what happens when we do that? Everything else falls right into place. All right, so we're talking about acts of service. We're talking about serving one another. We're not talking about self-service. Don't do acts of service, like I mentioned earlier, as a pretense to serve yourself. Hey, hon, I bought you this. Okay, let me tell you what I just saw on a video. I just saw. It was a griddle, right? A Blackstone griddle. and it was a pellet smoker all in one. Hey, hon, I bought you a griddle and a pellet smoker. And I'm talking to my wife. Who wants the griddle and the pellet smoker? She doesn't. Right? So that's an act of service, a pretense of an act of service for somebody else, but you're serving yourself. Okay? So let's not do that. Submit ourselves one to another. Let's learn to speak the language of that other person. All right, let's help out. Let's help out. Guys, you know, just as an example, and I'm not telling you that I'm the greatest, but when my wife has to clean the house, I ask her, hey, can I vacuum for you? I know how to run the vacuum. I don't do the dusting, although she tries to get me to dust, and I miss half the stuff in the house, you know, that I'm supposed to be dusting. I miss it. She doesn't let me do the kitchen floors or the bathroom floors, but I can clean the toilets. I was in the military, right? I know how to clean the toilet. She hates doing that, and I don't mind it. So you know what an act of service is? Yeah. I can plunge it. But see the little acts of service. See, I've just taken something off of her plate. That's an act of service. And it's a little something. It takes 10 minutes to vacuum the house, if that. I mean, you guys don't even have rugs in there. You got the one area rug, and that's like it. But you have 17 cats.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, you know, just as an example, I don't know what you do in your home. You probably do the same things. There'll be some nights when I'll go up and I'll wash the dishes, especially on wash night. Like if she's doing the laundry, so she's folding clothes and moving clothes, and she's in the bedroom folding all the clothes, and there's a whole sink full of dishes. I'm like, woman, I hope you get to those dishes.
You don't want to do that.
Right? No, there's sometimes, not all the time, but there's sometimes when I'll just get up and go in the kitchen and do the dishes. That's an act of service. That's one thing off of her list. Now, her love language may not be acts of service, but that certainly helps. And so, guys, we need to walk around, and ladies, when I say guys, I mean everybody. We need to walk around with our eyes open in the house. And if one of us is overwhelmed with a whole bunch of stuff and one of us is sitting in our recliner, then it'd probably be a good thing if you could get up and at least do something. That's an act of service. Okay, that's just being practical here. A practical aspect to this act of service. Submit ourselves one to another. We're going to serve one another. The Lord washed the disciples' feet as an example of serving one another. And we ought to do it by love. We saw that in Galatians. By love, serve one another. All right, don't do it because you have to. Do it because you get to. All right, questions or comments about acts of service?